Washington, D.C., Saturday, 4 March 1933, 12 noon. On the east portico of the U.S. Capitol, the President-elect, Governor Franklin Roosevelt of New York, is assisted out of his wheelchair, locks in his leg braces, and with the aid of his son Elliot, ambulates himself the 6 steps over to the space in front of the Speaker's lectern where he is administered the presidential oath of office by Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes. He is then assisted over to the lectern, grips it tightly with both hands, and begins his inaugural address as the newly sworn-in 32nd President of the United States. And just as a brief aside, if you've ever seen the film of this speech, or any of FDR's speeches really, you may have noticed that he only ever gestures with his head when he's speaking. That's because he had to hold on to the lectern with both arms in order to avoid falling over because his legs were completely dead weight. When the braces were locked in, he could remain upright and give the appearance of walking short distances, but only with great effort and ample assistance. But if he was going to stand for 15 or 20 minutes and deliver an address, it took every ounce of strength in both of his arms for him to create the impression of standing on his feet. That first inaugural address, the first of 4, as it turned out, was the first event of its kind that was heard live in real time by people all across the country, as home radios were just starting to become ubiquitous, and it came at a crucial moment for the nation, which was suffering through the worst part of the Great Depression. 25% of the population was out of work on Inauguration Day, and there was no such thing as unemployment insurance or food stamps or any of that stuff, so there was a lot of anticipation over what the new president was going to say that might possibly give people some glimmer of hope that things might improve. So there's one line from that speech that everybody knows, that everybody's heard 1,000 times or more, but we don't often hear the remainder of the passage, which it came right at the beginning of the address, so I want to quote it here. And while I'm doing that, I want you to try to imagine any 21st century Democrat speaking in similar terms. Quote, "So, first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and of vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory." End quote. It seems counterintuitive to us now, doesn't it? A Democrat president counseling against fear and against mass public hysteria? Because fear is the mother's milk of today's Democrat Party. From the corpse of President Joe Biden right on down, today's Democrats never open their mouths without telling you to be very, very afraid. They want you to fear the unknown, to fear your fellow citizens, to fear the future, fear going outside with your face uncovered, fear pretty much everything. They even want you to fear the weather, for God's sake. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, to borrow the term that was used so effectively by FDR, is the rocket fuel that powers their hate machine. It is the social currency they use to buy your vote, because they've adopted a political model in which they attempt to discount and destroy all the relationships you have with your fellow citizens, even with your family and friends, and replace those relationships with the only one that really matters, and that's your relationship with the central government. They want to strike a bargain with you that says, always vote for us, always obey when we tell you to do something, give us all your money and all your freedom, and we promise to keep you safe from all the scary, scary things that we made you irrationally afraid of in the first place. But we don't need to reach back all the way to 1933 to hear a Democrat president saying things that would be anathema in today's Democrat Party. For it was a mere 25 years ago, in the last State of the Union address of his first term, on Tuesday, 23 January 1996, that President Bill Clinton said the following, quote, "We must answer here 3 fundamental questions. First, how do we make the American dream of opportunity for all a reality for all Americans who are willing to work for it? Second, how do we preserve our old and enduring values as we move into the future? And third, how do we meet those challenges together as one America?" End quote. Oh wait, that's not the end quote. I'm still quoting. "We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem. We know, And we have worked to give the American people a smaller, less bureaucratic government in Washington. And we have to give the American people one that lives within its means. The era of big government is over. End quote for real this time. But wait, what's that? You mean the American dream is about opportunity and not guaranteed outcomes? The values of our past are good and useful things? Big government doesn't have all the answers? Big government is bad? Spending like a bunch of drunken sailors is bad? More bureaucracy is bad? Who is this crazed right-wing maniac who is saying all these offensive things anyway? But seriously, if you read out that passage to your average low-information Democrat voter, do you think they would ever guess that it's from a Democrat president, and a recent enough Democrat president to be still alive? But in fact, there's a lot of things about President Bill Clinton that today's Democrats would find troubling. Aside from his regrettable habit of using chubby young interns as living humidors. Here in San Diego, for example, in the mid-90s, right around the time of that speech, illegal immigration was an out-of-control problem that was quickly becoming a crisis. If you lived within 5 miles of the border, illegal aliens running across the freeway during rush hour had become a normal fixture of your daily commute by 1996. But then President Bill Clinton had a crazy idea. How about let's build ourselves a wall so they can't do that anymore? And so they built a wall, and it solved the problem. And Senator Joe Biden of Delaware enthusiastically voted for it. And he bragged for years afterward that he had voted for it, right up until the time he became a candidate for the Democrat presidential nomination in 2020, and had to quickly reinvent himself as a woke open borders activist. But it's like I always say, you can't be a senator for 36 years if you actually believe in anything. But I believe in you, Jim Eagle. I believe in your ability to hit the music in a timely fashion. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where a border wall is just the first line of defense, and if you get through that, we've got a pot of boiling tar with your name on it. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And you know what else I am? I am a certifiable masochist, for I listened to both days, in their entirety, of the Austin Millie McKenzie show yesterday and today. But ladies and gentlemen, I put myself through these things so that you don't have to. Such is my deep and abiding commitment to the craft of citizen journalism, and such is my concern for the mental health of my audience, because nobody in their right mind would sit and listen to 16 hours of that insufferable bullshit. And if they did, they'd probably come out of it with at least several screws loose. But I will let you folks be the judges of that. If I have one big takeaway from these 2 days of testimony, aside from Mark Milley's apparently superhuman penchant for telling more outrageous lies before 9 a.m. than most armies do all day, it is the extent to which the Democrats are falling all over each other to distance themselves from their own party's president, who has still only been in office for 9 months. And I know it seems a lot closer to 9 years, but it's true. If you got yourself knocked up on Inauguration Day, you were delivered of a bouncing baby boy or girl early last week. Now, I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. Certainly not in my living memory, not in my lifetime, not in our modern history, probably not in our history period. Have we had an elected president, allegedly, who'd become so politically toxic by the 9-month mark of his first term that the members of his own party were treating him like a botulism sandwich with bread made of smallpox? But that's how things were in the Senate yesterday. The only Democrat in the room who really attempted any sort of full-throated defense of President Corpsey Cadaverton was Massachusetts Senator and noted authority on Native American gastronomy, Elizabeth Warren, better known as Pocahontas, better known as Liawatha, better known as Big Chief Cheekbones So High, who probably identifies with Joe Biden more on the basis of being a fellow congenital liar than she does on the basis of being a fellow Democrat. The other Democrats in the room, I've been watching politics a long time, longer than most people, longer than could ever be considered healthy. And I've never seen a hearing in which members of the president's own party lined up to throw his ass under the bus with such vigorous enthusiasm. I was too young to remember the Watergate hearing since I was only about 6 weeks old at the time, but I've seen plenty of clips, and I think that's the only thing that provides any sort of analog to or precedent for the display that we witnessed yesterday. Even Da Nang Dick Blumenthal, also a noted congenital liar, having famously dodged the draft and then tried to pass him off as a Vietnam veteran, once being a Vietnam veteran became politically fashionable, that dude is normally the most reliable team player on the Democrat roster. But yesterday, if I had stumbled upon this hearing and not known who he was or what his party affiliation is, I might have reasonably assumed he was a Republican, because he was totally sounding like one. And for the rest of the Democrat senators in the room yesterday, if we're viewing it as a political continuum with Da Nang Dick Blumenthal on the critical end and Professor Pow Wow Chow on the sympathetic end, there were a hell of a lot more senators on the former side than there were on the latter. Also, if Mazie Hirono isn't the dumbest female senator in the history of the Republic, I have no idea who is. Just when I listen to the tone of her voice, with all due respect to Obi-Wan Kenobi, I can feel millions of my brain cells crying out in terror, then they're suddenly silenced because they died, obliterated by the Death Star laser of insufferable, vapid up-talking. Maybe Mazie Hirono and Ilhan Omar should have a one-on-one steel cage death match, where all they do is talk, and we see whose voice makes the audience commit mass suicide first. Now, it only got marginally better for Team Joe Biden in the House hearing today. There at least were a few representatives who were willing to defend him by name, so his people must have been working the phones pretty hard last night, but most of it still sounded pretty half-hearted, because on the House side, every single one of those guys has to run for re-election next year, and you can tell how hesitant they are to hitch their wagon to the corpse of a president whose approval rating is only slightly above the approval rating of getting your balls chewed off by a pack of wild dogs while dying of radiation poisoning while having sex with Whoopi Goldberg. But we still need to talk about our good friend Mark Milley, who, needless to say, didn't give me any reason during these 16 hours of hearings to have the slightest pang of regret about having done those 2 anti-Mark Milley videos I've made within the past 4 weeks. If anything, I feel like I might have gone a little too easy on him, because oh my freaking god, what an incredible buffoon, and what a prolific liar this guy is. Wait, actually, let me qualify this statement. Either Milley is a liar, or else 2 presidents, 2 secretaries of defense, 1 undersecretary of defense, 2 national security advisors, and half a dozen authors and reporters are all liars. And I think I'm happy to apply Occam's razor here and put my money on Milley being the liar. Psychologically, I think Milley and Grand Ayatollah Tony Fauci have much in common. Each is a career bureaucrat who desperately wants to be a media celebrity. Each is extremely desirous of doing whatever it takes to make himself into an historically relevant figure, and each is willing to tell as many stupendous lies as it takes to advance those 2 egomaniacal, self-aggrandizing goals. Did you talk to this book author? Yes. 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 But there's nothing out of the ordinary about that, says General Milley. I talk to the press probably 4 or 5 times a week. Wait, come again? You do what? You just casually sprinkled that into your answer like it's no big deal? Your only job is being the top military advisor to our commander-in-chief, and you're spending your days doing hit-piece interviews for anti-Trump books and sitting down with every Tom, Dick, and Harry reporter who happens to ring you up on the telephone? That is, when you're not busy trying to understand white rage and making sure every junior officer in the Army has read the latest Ibram X. Kendi book. But this is all starting to make so much sense now. When General Milley said a few weeks ago that, well, I never saw anything that indicated the Afghan army and government were going to collapse in a matter of 11 days, it seems pretty abundantly clear that it's because you weren't fucking paying attention because you were too busy pretending to be a celebrity. Now, on the matter of his friendly phone calls with the head of the People's Liberation Army in Communist China, General Milley has claimed 2 days in a row now that he gave advance notice of those calls to both the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor. But both of those men are on the record as saying they had no knowledge of such calls and would never have authorized them even if they did. Mark Milley has no command authority whatsoever, and that's important to reiterate. His one and only function, his one and only job description, is receiving the advice of the Joint Chiefs and transmitting that advice to the President. And I especially loved the part in today's hearing where he casually remarked that, well, yeah, I called up the Chinese and I assured them that President Trump wasn't going to launch a surprise attack against them. Well, no freaking shit, Sherlock. It's not much of a surprise attack if you just told them about it. Now, I'm still not overly impressed with General McKenzie. I still think he looks like Elmer Fudd and sounds like Foghorn Leghorn, but I don't get the impression that he's a congenital liar or seeks personal notoriety for himself. I felt like he was mostly giving honest answers to the questions he was asked and not so much trying to cover his own ass. But in doing so, he really made Joe Biden look incredibly bumbling and incompetent, but then Joe Biden has never needed much help with that. And more than once, McKenzie took personal responsibility for the botched drone strike that killed the Afghan family of 10, which is more accountability than we've gotten from the other two assholes. But even having said that, if I was a 4-star general who gave the order to launch that drone strike and we wound up blowing 7 little kids to smithereens because we got the thing that completely wrong, it would seem like a matter of basic decency and professional decorum that I should resign my command and my commission, but that's just me. And there have still been no consequences for anyone for that botched drone strike, except, of course, for the 10 dead Afghans. On the other hand, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, who didn't name any names or disrespect anyone personally, all he did was post a YouTube video saying that he cannot in good conscience remain in a military in which there is no command accountability when 13 of our people and dozens of innocent civilians get blown to bits due to our botched decisions. He said, yeah, I know I'm going to be relieved of my command. I know I'm going to lose my career and my pension and my health care, but I cannot in good conscience watch these things happen and watch there be no consequences for the men who screwed the pooch and got all these people killed for no damn good reason and remain a part of this organization. Lieutenant Colonel Scheller had everything to lose and nothing to gain by making that video. And he made it anyway, knowing full well he was going to pay an extremely heavy price for doing so. And yesterday they threw him in the brig, where he's currently being held in solitary confinement. He's not being allowed to speak to his wife, or his kids, or his parents, or his legal counsel, and he hasn't even been advised of what offense he's being charged with, while Mark Milley is still gallivanting around Washington, D.C., pretending to be a media superstar. Stuart Scheller is an American patriot and a man of real moral courage. Mark Milley is a ridiculous pussy, a political play actor, and a serial liar who dishonors the screaming eagle he wears on his right shoulder, who's just trying to ingratiate himself to the ruling faction so he can make it to retirement and then jump on that defense contractor gravy train. Stuart Scheller is an honorable man and an American patriot, but Mark Milley should be ashamed of himself. If anybody deserves to be sitting in a jail cell tonight, you tell me which of those two men it is. Lloyd Austin, he's a less stupid version of Mark Milley. He was thoroughly unexceptional as a field commander, but he learned to navigate the political battlefield, learned to vomit out the political, fashionable catchphrases that civilian leadership wants to hear. So when he hit retirement, he got to jump right on that defense contractor gravy train that Milley wants so desperately to ride one day. Joe Biden chose him to run the Defense Department with orders to wokesterize the military, to purge the armed forces of all the conservatives and Christians as quickly as possible. And he has pursued that task with singularity of purpose and with enthusiastic vigor. His first act as defense secretary was to announce a 90-day stand-down, during which time we would purge the ranks of domestic extremists and white supremacy, which I guess that means making everybody take a bunch of bullshit woke diversity training classes because they still haven't bothered telling us what domestic extremism actually is or what a white supremacist looks like. But you can't do that because when you start getting into specifics, then your assertions become disprovable and falsifiable. And that is the last thing that our friends on the left ever want. For those fans keeping score at home, this past spring, while the Taliban were overrunning Afghanistan, province by province, what were our military leaders spending their time on? Well, Mark Milley was trying to understand white rage, and he was putting together a reading list of all the most fashionable woke race hustler books. Lloyd Austin was ordering a 90-day stand-down over something that he says is crucially important, but which he refuses to identify. And what was our State Department doing? They were flying a Hooray for Homosexuality rainbow flag over our embassy in the capital city of the world's most conservative Muslim country, because I am sure that had a wonderfully positive effect on the views of the local populace toward the United States, and a similarly positive effect on the morale of the Afghan forces on whom we were depending to stand up and fight for their country. But I guess our desire for woke cultural imperialism and to signal our own moral virtue on Twitter trumped everything else in the end. After 20 years of conflict, if you were wanting to make extra sure that every American parent who lost a son or daughter in Afghanistan felt like their child's life was sacrificed for no good reason, that is just about exactly how you would go about it. Thanks for watching. See you Friday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.